All right, this is interesting because it's the Fever GM, and it's also directly in response to something specific that is being said online on social media, on YouTube by content creators and others. Caitlin Clark has come out many times and sort of talked about the overarching aspect of things that are made up or being run with or aren't real and push back on that. But in this instance, you're talking about a specific claim that Amber Cox is going back on, which shows you it gets to the players, the organization, and the team after a while. And
the words were meant to cut deep. A viral claim suggested the Indiana Fever locker room was finally breathing a sigh of relief because Caitlin Clark was off the floor. It wasn't just a rumor, it was a targeted strike at the chemistry of the league's most talked about team. But the silence didn't last long. Aaliyah Boston and the front office reached their breaking point as these toxic narratives began to poison their season. This wasn't just a disagreement over basketball strategy. This was a direct accusation that the team was celebrating the absence of their biggest star. And the response was nothing short of a total shutdown of the lies that have been circulating online for weeks.
And diagrams, I guess you could say. But this is what Amber Cox had to say in regards to this. She wrote initially, "Fever fans, we appreciate you. Can't thank you enough for always showing up for us at home and on the road. We hear you and are incredibly grateful for the support." And then Caitlin Clark's Stan account says Amber Cox is always loud after a win without CC. And then Amber Cox says, "Nonsense. You know who is always happy after any win? CC. Because this is a team full of people who celebrate and care for one another. Like all of them, she's a great teammate."
It all started with a single inflammatory post on social media that caught fire. A prominent fan account claimed that certain figures within the organization were always loud, and noticeably happier whenever the team found success without Caitlin Clark in the lineup. The implication was clear: the Fever players were jealous, resentful, and preferred a world where Clark wasn't the center of the universe. For a team trying to build a winning culture under a massive spotlight, this was the ultimate insult. It painted the players not as teammates, but as rivals working against their own rookie sensation. The online firestorm grew so large that the organization could no longer ignore the noise.
And then she adds, "We can't wait to have Caitlin Clark back," versus, they want to bench her or they want to do whatever to keep her down or keep her stats down or whatever the case may be. Now, again, there's a distinction because you can criticize the general manager for not making the right roster moves. You could say they should have kept Justine Passat if you thought that. I use that as an example. I haven't seen enough from Justine Passat. I've seen enough from Damiris Dantas to not be thrilled. Or over Grace Van Sluten or whatever. You could say, they didn't make the right moves in free agency to address the defense or shore up the depth.
General Manager Amber Cox decided she had seen enough of the ridiculous narrative. Usually, front office executives stay above the fray of social media arguments, but the nature of these attacks required a direct hit. Cox went public to dismantle the idea that there was any joy in Clark's absence. She didn't just offer a polite PR statement, she went for the jugular. She called the claims absolute nonsense and made it clear that the entire roster was unified. The message was loud and clear: if you think this team is happy to see their star player sidelined, you aren't paying attention to the reality of the locker room or the bond these women have built.
I've seen enough from Damiris Dantas to not be thrilled. Or over Grace Van Sluten or whatever. You could say, they didn't make the right moves in free agency to address the defense or shore up the depth in the front court. All of those things. You can also go to to the head coach, which has been the main topic of conversation most of the season. And I've talked about a philosophical difference, between Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark ad nauseum. Obviously Ty Harris has come in and played well, is familiar with Stephanie White's system. And Ty Harris showed she got a little sick of this the other day when she came back. Let's take.
The GM specifically highlighted that Caitlin Clark herself is the first person to celebrate her teammates' success. There's a persistent lie that Clark is an isolated island on the team, but Cox flipped the script. She revealed that Clark is a great teammate who cares deeply for the group, and the feeling is mutual. The organization is counting down the seconds until she is back on the court, which completely contradicts the theory that they are trying to keep her down or suppress her statistics. By being so specific in her defense, Cox wasn't just protecting a player, she was protecting the integrity of the entire Indiana Fever program from a growing wave of conspiracy theories.
Health and keeping her from getting hurt and being worried about her getting hurt than it was trying to control her statistics or keep her down or whatever. And I can't hook Stephanie White up to a polygraph and say that, she wouldn't prefer Ty Harris in certain situations because of game management or defense or quickly moving the ball. There's a lot of repetition about how quick the ball moves side to side, not over dribbling, not making home run passes. But Sophie Cunningham said in the huddle the other day, don't make home run passes. And, Caitlin Clark is also statistically having a great year.
Aaliyah Boston has been at the center of this storm, often unfairly compared to Clark in a way that suggests a rift between the two stars. The narrative shifted recently when fans noticed Boston didn't have the same minute restrictions as Clark, leading to accusations of favoritism or internal sabotage. But the truth is much more grounded in medical reality than social media drama. Boston has been grinding through a persistent leg injury since her time in the unrivaled league, and her recovery plan is entirely different from Clark's. The idea that Boston is being allowed to play while Clark is being held back ignores the complex sports medicine happening behind the scenes.
I got this comment earlier. Do you think it's weird AB didn't have a minutes restriction against Phoenix after missing the Sparks game? No, I don't think it's weird. Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston are two different individuals with two different medical reports in two different circumstances, right? Like, if you look at AB, she's been dealing with the same leg injury since Unrivaled. They've been managing it the entire season since Unrivaled. And she sat out games earlier this year, come back, and she was on a minutes restriction for a big chunk of the year, and I feel like...
Critics pointed to the Phoenix game as proof of a conspiracy, asking why Boston played heavy minutes while Clark's rotation seemed fragmented. But, as the medical reports suggest, you cannot compare two different athletes with two different bodies. Aaliyah Boston's situation has been a matter of long-term maintenance and ramping up her conditioning after missing games earlier in the year. Her availability wasn't a slight against Clark. It was the result of a specific, months-long recovery process. To suggest otherwise is to ignore the actual physical toll these players endure. Boston isn't just a player, she's a leader who has had to endure these shocking lies while trying to lead a young squad on more than her back.
Erica Wheeler said, "How's your leg?" before the game. Caitlin Clark admitted that the back can impact other aspects of the body. So I don't think Caitlin Clark was dealing with exactly the same thing that she was dealing with at the beginning of the season, and she was feeling pain elsewhere, like pelvic area, quad, all that. So in a sense, it was a new issue that they were popping up and are proceeding with caution on versus the exact same thing for Aaliyah Boston. But regardless, they're different people with different medical reports, with different recovery plans. It wasn't a, conspiratorial thing in that regard. And it is tough. It is tough to go through.
The management of Caitlin Clark's health has been the most scrutinized part of the season, and for good reason. Fans were baffled by her short spurts on the court and what looked like a lack of rhythm. However, the impetus behind these decisions wasn't about controlling her stats. It was about protecting her future. Clark hasn't just been dealing with a simple back issue, she's been managing a cascading series of physical problems that started at the beginning of the year. When you see her frustrated on the bench, it's not because she's being silenced by the coach. It's because her body and the medical staff are forcing a level of caution that her competitive spirit hates.
That surrounds Caitlin Clark, it seems, at all times. And obviously it goes beyond just the basketball aspect, and you've got the online fights all the time on both ends of this culture war that have nothing to do with Caitlin Clark. You've got the Congress thing that really has nothing to do with Caitlin Clark. And then you've got all these fans who actually fill arenas or actually watching TV and have nothing to do with any of that. And then you have the people that are in charge of managing the basketball team and the minutes and the personnel and the wins and losses and all that. And so I do my best to be honest about it, but also
the reality of the WNBA schedule is brutal. And for a player like Clark, back-to-back games are a high-risk gamble. Research in sports medicine shows that overexertion without proper recovery time is a recipe for disaster. While fans pay good money to see her every single night, the front office has to look at the big picture. They are terrified of a long-term injury that could derail her entire career. If it were up to the medical staff, she would likely miss even more games to ensure her longevity. This isn't a conspiracy to keep her off the highlight reels. It's a desperate attempt to keep the face of the franchise from suffering a catastrophic physical breakdown. The most shocking revelation involves the true extent of Clark's physical struggle. While the public was told it was just a back issue, internal conversations suggested the pain was migrating. Even teammates like Erica Wheeler were caught on camera asking about her leg before games. Clark herself admitted that back issues often impact the pelvic area and the quads, creating a chain reaction of pain that makes playing at an elite level nearly impossible. This was a new, developing issue that required immediate caution. The lies online suggest she was benched for political reasons, but the medical reality was that she was playing through significant, radiating pain. There is a massive distinction between legitimate basketball critique and the wild conspiracies currently flooding the internet. You can criticize Stephanie White for her substitution patterns or her defensive schemes all day long. That's part of the game. You can argue that the team should have kept certain players or made different moves in free agency to shore up the front court. But when those critiques turn into claims that the coach is intentionally trying to sabotage her own star player's career, it crosses into dangerous territory. The shocking lies aren't about the box score. They are about the alleged malicious intent that simply doesn't exist. The tension between the coaching staff and Clark is real, but it's a philosophical difference, not a personal vendetta. Stephanie White has a specific system, one that emphasizes quick ball movement and avoiding the home run pass. Clark, by nature, is a high-risk, high-reward playmaker who lives for those spectacular moments. In the huddle, players like Sophie Cunningham have been heard telling the team not to hunt for those flashy plays. To an outsider, this looks like they are trying to strip Clark of her identity. In reality, it's a coach trying to instill a disciplined, championship-level system that doesn't rely solely on one person's brilliance. The frustration on Clark's face during games is often misinterpreted as anger toward her teammates. When she gets pulled after a short spurt, she isn't mad at Aaliyah Boston or the other guards. She's frustrated with the restrictions. She wants to be the hero, but the organization is playing a game of prevent defense with her health. This mismatch between her desire to play and the team's need to protect her creates an optic that the lies feed on. They see a frustrated star and assume the locker room is toxic, when, in reality, the locker room is just trying to survive the most intense media circus in the history of women's sports. Enter the Taharis factor. Because she is familiar with Stephanie White's system and has played well in her minutes, some have suggested she is being used to replace Clark's production or prove the team doesn't need her. This is one of the most damaging lies currently circulating. Adding depth isn't an attack on the starter, it's a necessity for a winning team. Tahara playing well doesn't mean Clark is less valuable. It means the team is finally building a roster that can withstand the rigors of a full season. Yet, every time a bench player has a good game, the Fever are better without CC narrative gets another boost from the trolls. What Aaliyah Boston and the rest of the players are dealing with goes far beyond basketball. They are caught in the middle of a culture war they never asked for. From online fights between fan accounts to politicians using Clark's name for leverage, the actual sport is being drowned out. The players are human beings who see what is being said about them. When they see thousands of people claiming they hate their own teammate, it takes a toll. Aaliyah Boston snapping isn't about one comment. It's about the cumulative weight of being told for months that your success is a threat to your friend's legacy. The GM's forceful response was a necessary shield for these players. By calling out the nonsense with specificity, Amber Cox provided a blueprint for how the organization will handle these lies moving forward. They aren't going to be breathless about every rumor, but they will not allow the team's chemistry to be dismantled by people who have never stepped foot in their facility. The specificity of her defense, noting that Clark is the one who celebrates others, was a masterclass in PR. It addressed the exact lie being told and replaced it with a verified truth about the team's internal dynamics. Many fans have criticized the front office for not making enough moves to address the defense or the depth in the front court. These are fair points. The decision to move on from certain players and rely on others like Dyrus Dantes hasn't always paid off on the scoreboard, but there is a huge difference between a GM making a bad roster move and a GM being part of a conspiracy to suppress a superstar. The shocking lies thrive in the gap between these two things. People take a genuine basketball failure and turn it into a scripted drama, ignoring the fact that everyone in that building benefits when Caitlin Clark succeeds. The rotation breakdown that everyone hated was likely a failed experiment in game management, not a hit job. Allowing Clark to play in short, disjointed bursts was an attempt to keep her warm without overextending her pelvic and quad issues. It clearly didn't work from a rhythm standpoint, and Clark was visibly annoyed. But if the goal was truly to keep her down, they wouldn't have her on the court at all. They are trying to find a middle ground that doesn't exist, keeping a generational talent healthy while also trying to win games in the most competitive league in the world. It's a tightrope walk that the internet is making even harder. We have to talk about the polygraph moment. If you hooked the coaching staff up to a lie detector, would they admit they prefer a more traditional, safe style of play? Perhaps. Every coach has a bias, but that doesn't mean they want Clark to fail. It means they are trying to blend her unique, home run style with a foundation that can win when her shots aren't falling. The lies suggest there is a secret war happening behind closed doors. But the reality is much more boring. It's just a group of people trying to figure out how to play together under an impossible amount of pressure and scrutiny. The fan accounts on social media are fueling a fire that is starting to burn the very person they claim to support. By attacking Aaliyah Boston and the GM, these fans are creating an environment where every win is scrutinized for the wrong reasons. When Amber Cox says, "Enough with this ridiculous narrative," she is speaking for the entire organization. They want the focus back on the 94 feet of hardwood, not the 280 characters of a tweet. The team is tired of being the protagonist in a fictional drama created by people who care more about engagement than the actual health and happiness of the players. There is a unique irony in the claim that the Fever are happy without Clark. Without her, the arenas aren't full, the TV ratings aren't breaking records, and the franchise isn't the center of the sports world. Every single person in that organization, from the janitors to the owners, knows that their current relevance is tied directly to number 22. The idea that they would actively work against their own golden goose is the most illogical part of the entire shocking lie saga. They aren't just happy to have her back, they are desperate for it, both for the wins and for the end of the constant outside noise. Aaliyah Boston's role as the emotional anchor of this team cannot be overstated. While the world focuses on the scoring and the logos, she is the one holding the locker room together through the firestorm. When she sees these claims that she's louder after wins without Clark, it hits a nerve because it devalues her own hard work and her genuine friendship with Caitlin. Boston has been a pro's pro since she entered the league. And seeing her name dragged into a culture war is the breaking point for many within the Fever organization. She isn't snapping because she's angry at Clark. She's snapping because she's tired of being a pawn in a fake story. Moving forward, the Fever have a long road ahead to rebuild the trust of a fan base that has been fed a steady diet of misinformation. The GM's clapback was the first step in reclaiming the narrative. It's a reminder that, while critique is a part of sports, conspiracy is a choice. The players are unified, the medical staff is being cautious, and the coaching staff is trying to adapt to a once-in-a-lifetime talent. The shocking lies might get clicks, but they don't win championships. The only way through this is for the team to stay loud, not in the absence of Clark, but in their unwavering support for her and each other. Ultimately, the Indiana Fever are a team in transition, dealing with growing pains that are being broadcast to millions. The nonsense and ridiculous narratives will likely continue as long as the spotlight remains this bright. But the next time you see a claim that the locker room is happy to see a star sidelined, remember the forceful defense from the front office. Remember that these are human beings with medical reports and personal bonds that go far beyond what a camera captures.